Bienvenidos al tópico 2. En este tópico vamos a trabajar el tema de problema como generador de conocimiento y hemos decidido traer la experiencia o los comentarios de un profesor de la Universidad de Aalborg y dos estudiantes. Uno de los estudiantes de hecho es de Polonia y viene de un sistema de lo que llamaríamos un sistema de aprendizaje más tradicional. Así que los dejamos con las recomendaciones de los profesores y de los estudiantes. So, Thomas, we are in this City Lab project and we are teaching professors in Latin America about PBL, and we would like to share your experience about PBL here in Aalborg University, and we would like to ask you two questions. The first one is why a problem is an effective way to facilitate meaningful learning. What is your opinion, comments about that?
Well, the problem is very important in problem-based learning, obviously, because the problem is the driving force of the learning process. It's actually what drives the whole process. That's what the students are directed at. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in PBL you find models where the teacher will give the students a certain problem to work with. So say, you need to solve this, that problem, that case. Mm-hmm. But actually in the Aalborg model, a very important part is that the students, they have to identify the problem, they have to formulate the problem, they need to understand what the problem is. And that's a process. And that's also the importance of it. It's a process of understanding what is actually the problem of this context. Mm-hmm. Because when you come into the world, work in the world, it's not clear-cut. Usually you'll be confronted with situations where you're not given a problem to solve. You need to find out what is actually the case here. It's also, that's one part of it, it's also hugely motivational because the students can really follow something. They can direct their attention towards something that interests them, that it's really motivating for them when they choose the problem to work with. Rather than somebody say, well, this is interesting, please solve that. They get to say, well, I want to work with this. I want to understand this particular problem. And when they need to identify the problem, they need also to go into an inquiry process where they need to understand that it is exactly a process. They need to develop an understanding and they need to become smarter to address the problem. Usually they will start sort of, you'd say, very broad, say, oh, we want to solve this big, huge question. And then they find out, well, actually, we need to sort of narrow it down, and already people have actually worked with this problem before. Oh, wow, there's research on this topic. Oh, so we need to actually cut it down and narrow it down and make it more manageable. And this, what we thought in the beginning was a problem, turns out to actually not be the problem. So it's also a learning process. It's an analysis of what is actually the problem. And that is very important. And also for later work life.
Actually, the last part just leads us to the next question, because many of the teachers, they ask about what are the kind of criteria for a good problem formulation. What will you say to them? What kind of tips, if they need to help actually the students also to find or to narrow down the problem?
Yeah, it needs to be a manageable problem. Of course, I mean, it needs to be something that I think you should look at problems just like research questions. How we as researchers work with research questions. It needs to be something that you can actually research within a given time, and that you can actually answer or address in some sense. Because it can quickly become very vague, particularly in the first semester, you see sort of problem formulations where they want to solve all of society's problems. How will social media affect the world we live in, and what can we do about it? And I mean, from a research perspective, that's just too big a question. Yeah. So it's also a process. I mean, in Aalborg we have a supervisor connected or attached to each group, so the supervisor works with the students. I think it's through a dialogue you get the students to understand, well, this is not really a manageable problem. You get to understand, okay, maybe somebody has already written something on this subject, maybe this theory can help you. So it's a process where you have a dialogue with the students and help them come to a better and more delineated problem.
So actually these process of finding the problem that is there is what is guiding the learning process. I mean,
yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the problem is co-constructed.
Yeah,
You could say
exactly.
between the supervisor and the student. It's sort of a back and forth. Of course, the student should be in the front seat. They are the drivers. But I mean, the supervisor is also there to say, well, ask critical questions. Okay, so from a research perspective, what is actually the interesting part of this? Okay, you say, how can we make this website of the municipality more beautiful? And then as a supervisor, you could say, well, yeah, but what would be the academic interest in that? What would be the academic, what is beauty, or what is a good web page? What are the principles of that? So what are the more overarching problems you would draw out, or the more academically founded problems? So it's a dialogue. And I mean, the students do need a lot of help in coming to a good problem formulation, and it's a process that takes time. It's not like you'll get it right from the start and from the beginning. It's progress, and we need to work with that progress to see how the students actually become better at formulating, identifying, and addressing problems throughout their education. So it is something that needs to be followed up and thought about in each semester. It needs to be a recurrent dialogue, so to say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When we talk about problem-based learning, so of course the problem take a main place in this process. What are the challenges or the difficulties for you as a student, or in general students, if you know that, about defining the problem for the project as we work here in Malmö University?
Yes, well, defining a problem is always hard, because whenever you define the problem, there are many different things that you've got to think about. You've got to think about, is this achievable? Can I actually do this? Does this fit into, for example, if you have a case which is the municipality, does this fit into their practice? Does this, the way I want to solve this problem, or the way I define this problem, does this fit into the way they see the problem? Because it sort of has to, in order to achieve a proper collaboration with the, for example, the employees at the municipality, if you are to work with them. So there are a lot of different factors that need to be considered. Many of these happen just without you thinking about it. So you will automatically put the problem into the context. But if you are to really define like the perfect problem, you've got to consider all these different aspects.
If you should give advice to the teachers in these universities from the City Lab project that they will take for supporting their students, what will you say to them? I mean, what could be a good advice?
Well, what I've found for myself, what has been a good advice for me to consider whenever I was to find a problem, or to find out specifically what I wanted to work with, was that the problem I was to work with both had to have an interest, because if it didn't have an interest, motivation wouldn't be as high as it could be, and it wouldn't help the group at all. If the motivation is low, it's going to be a hard group work. But it also has to be the problem itself. It can't just be, I see a problem. You have to find a question that actually allows you to work with it, rather than just say, I see that there's a problem, many employees aren't getting here in time, what do we do about this? You've got to find an aspect, or like hone in on an aspect that both interests you and allows you to actually both gain knowledge that you want, but also to widen your perspective if need be. So it can't be too narrow, but it certainly can't be too broad, so that you get confused in solving it.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Daria, thank you for this time that you are giving to us.
Sure.
I know that you are from Poland, so you came here to Aalborg University almost 2 years ago. And we could say that you have this transition from being a more traditional teaching approach and learning approach to a problem-based learning approach. Could you tell a little bit about the challenge and the difference about these two ways of teaching?
Sure. So, as you know, I did my bachelor in Poland, but I also went on a few exchanges, but into some other countries, but actually all of them were within this traditional approach. So then, while I was on exchanges, I actually felt less of a difference compared to when I came to Aalborg, and then it was a really big transition. And I think there were several changes and challenges that were particularly, let's say, important. And I don't know, we could start with collaboration. So even though I did work in groups before, I don't think it was ever to this extent, you know, that you have this very big module and it takes the whole semester and you really get to spend a lot of time with the people you work with, and you have to discuss so much and agree on so many things. And usually it was to a much smaller extent, I would say, so you didn't maybe need that many skills to collaborate, because even if it didn't work out, it's fine, because it was just, let's say, I don't know, 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So it didn't work out and then you move on. But here it's such a big part of the education that you actually, I think, really learn to collaborate, and it's a much different experience than the one I had before while working in groups. And yeah, so that's one thing. Another thing, I guess, it's about being critical and reflective, because that's not something that the teachers or lecturers really focused on in my previous educations. And yeah, and it was a bit difficult to come here, sit in the class, and then in professional inquiry course, and then we read the article and the teacher says, discuss. And then you could see how all of the Danish students felt really comfortable and really used to it. And then they had no problems with sharing their opinions, positive or negative, or their feelings or their thoughts in relation to the text we read, for example. While you could see that students who came from outside, they really weren't that sure what to do, and they also wasn't that accustomed to this, to having this discussion and being also reflective in my reports and my projects and like throughout the education. Of course, it was included in there to some extent, but I would say not as much as it is here, where you really need to think and discuss all of the choices that you made throughout your research, and then also think about what you did learn and what you could have done better and all of those aspects. But yeah, I think that's something you learn with time, and then now I'm feeling much more comfortable with it. Well, another thing I think comes with the problem itself. And so when you come here and you are told that you need to pick the problem, it's a bit, should I talk about it now already, because I know it's your next question, and then you go there and you wonder, okay, but what is the problem? What could be the problem? And in my experience, it really helped that I had some Danish students in my group at that time, so they had a bit of a better idea what we could choose to work on. But well, I think that also it comes with the cultural difference, because for example in Poland it wouldn't be typical to go to school and do some research there. So then when I sit here and I think, okay, I would like to work with a problem that is somewhere outside of the university, what do I do? Where do I go? Who can I talk to? How do I go around with this? And also how to find a problem that A, interests me, and B, is close enough to the study regulation. And then from what I've seen, many students really find it really challenging to find something that meets both of those requirements, that they both find it interesting, but it also fits the module that you have at the moment. And then even if you sort of know what you want to work with, then there comes the question of how to make sure that it's not too wide and not too narrow.
Mm-hmm.
So really find the specific focus and find a problem that is also feasible during
Yeah.
the time limit. That's
Mhm.
another thing,
Mm-hmm.
because I think quite often people try to pick problems that are maybe too challenging to actually work on it during, like to come to some really interesting results within 3 or 4 months of the semester. Actually, project work takes even less sometimes than 3 months. So that's another thing to know how much work you can put into it within the time limit, and whether you will really manage to collect data within this time limit, and all of those sorts of problems. So that's another aspect, I think, that it's a bit difficult with the problem. And then I think it's much easier if you have some predetermined maybe problems that like during our eighth semester, when there were some suggestions that okay, you can work within academia within this bigger project, and then at least you get this general direction that you can within the group narrow down if you all agree that that's something that interests you, but at least I don't know, it makes it a bit easier to have some general frame within which you have to pick your problem. So that made it quite
Good, thank you so much.
sure.
Muchas gracias por su atención y esperamos que los comentarios de los profesores y los estudiantes les ayuden al diseño de sus problemas en el CityLab módulo. Thank you.